Net, perfectionism is a form of self-sabotage. And all of that, let me tell you right now, is absolute fucking bullshit. When we are trying too hard, when we are doing too much, that's where your leadership potential is sacrificed. The more time I spent on dotting every I and crossing every T, I was losing an opportunity. You're not being your own best friend. Honey, you've done enough. It's good enough. Put it out there. Let it go. Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Tosca and I am your host. If you've been here before, I'm so glad you're back. This is a really important topic I'm talking to you about today, and that is perfectionism. If you're new to the podcast, I'm so glad you're here as well, because this is a topic that's going to get right to the heart of some of the deepest work that I do around our inner critics, how we're treating ourselves, and how that impacts how we show up as leaders of our own life and also leaders out in the world, whether that's in the communities you live in or the workplace that you go to every day. This topic can make a huge impact. Really looking at what perfectionism means for you, where are you on that continuum, can really make a huge difference in, quite frankly, your own inner peace. It can make a really big difference in how your employees perceive you. It can make a difference in terms of the kind of stress and tension that you may feel at home, and even in your social communities. So let's just dive in then, shall we? Perfectionism for me has been a word that I haven't always closely identified with. You know, if somebody were to say, are you a perfectionist? I wouldn't raise my hand immediately. And that's because I identify with other kinds of language around this, such as I'm really hard on myself. I set high expectations, sometimes to a fault. Things like, I want my performance to be the best that I can possibly be. These are the kinds of language that I identify more with than perfectionism. But I know a lot of folks, they may hear that word and say, oh yeah, absolutely. Or they may hear that word and say, yeah, probably sometimes. One of the very first times that I was ever called a perfectionist was when I was 22 years old, and it was my first corporate job. I worked at Wegmans Food Markets, and one of the instructional designers that had been there for decades said to me that I was a perfectionist. And it stuck with me. And I think it stuck with me for a few reasons. Number one, it was the first time anybody ever said that to me. Number two, I had been in that office probably for a year or so, and I had been working really hard on doing a really great job at creating a training program called Produce University. And it was my first time in corporate. It was my first time putting a training program together of such magnitude that I was executing across the entire 65 store chain at the time. And so I felt a great responsibility. And because I didn't have an education or a background in training and development, I wanted to make sure that the work that I did was respectable and that the department could be proud of. So I was identified more with making sure I got things right. And I think that when she used that term with me, what was hard was that there wasn't this acknowledgement of, I know you're here really working hard, trying to do a great job. It was said to me in a negative way, right? I was spending too much time. I was nitpicking, all those things. But the bigger problem with her using that label with me was that she didn't give me any tools or any idea on how not to be a perfectionist. Okay, what am I supposed to do differently? And I share that story for a couple reasons. And one of the biggest reasons is because if we are giving our employees feedback, if we're giving people in our life feedback that we love, and we're not actually going any further than that, then we're really kind of being lazy with our feedback. We are not giving the folks tools to know what to do next. So I'm sure you've experienced this in your life. If you've had any time working for other people or have been in relationships with people that care about you, they're going to give you feedback. And part of it is, yeah, it's on you to say, okay, well, what does that mean to you? And what is it you'd like me to do differently? And also part of it is on them to say, here's why I think it's holding you back, or here's why I think it's a challenge for our department or for your career personally, right? So we have to go beyond labels and give people tools. That's the big reason why I share that story. But of course, the other reason why I share it is because it was that first time that word kind of came into my life and in a way that made me kind of stop in my tracks. And a big reason why I'm not very connected to that word perfectionism is, let's be honest, like I was born looking very different from everybody else and had scars on my face from day one, right? My very first surgery, I was 3 months old. So for me, I had this very realistic understanding of, let's say, this idea of perfectionism as it relates to our looks or our body image or whatever. And I knew that there was no such standard that I could ever meet. And so in that regard, I was like, well, I'm not even going to try, because what's the point? And that journey of finding acceptance of my perfect imperfections. So that's a big reason why my entire life I've never been one to accept the status quo or look to reach the standards set by status quo and all of that. So I have both of these things within me, right? Within me, I have this knowing that perfectionism is an illusion, and perfectionism is really defined by other people. It's never defined by yourself. You're trying to reach some gold standard that, quite frankly, is not realistic or ever achievable or even definable. And that's when you know you're dealing with perfectionism, because it's like when you sit there and say, well, what does perfect look like? And then, okay, if you can, let's just say that you can define it, which I would be hard pressed. Then, okay, who set that standard of perfection? And how do we know that they're right? And how are they setting it? And what's their viewpoint on that? Right? So when we look at the fact that we all grew up in education systems where there was a top grade, and then there was a top grade, but sometimes there was even an ability to reach above that grade. You could reach 100%, but maybe you could get extra credit and reach 110%. So we grew up in a system where we felt like perfection was attainable and realistic and made sense as a goal. But that's in the education system. In the real world, I beg to differ that is actually a helpful way to look at achievement, success. Because if we are looking at what does 100% look like, what it comes with is a huge opportunity cost. And it often does also in the school environment, right? Because if you are aiming for 100%, then you're probably going to be suffering in other parts of your life, or sacrificing, I should say, other parts of your life, like a social life, like learning extracurricular things where maybe you're not getting graded on it. And we have to keep this in perspective. This is the biggest reason why I want to talk to you about perfectionism today, because I want you to become aware of what it's costing you to reach that standard that you've set for yourself in whatever it is. Maybe it's even in parenting. Maybe it is in managing others. Maybe it is in the deliverables that you provide on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a quarterly basis. Because when we are trying too hard, when we are doing too much, where we get to a point of diminishing returns, that's where your leadership potential is sacrificed, because you are spending time on things that aren't going to get you the returns that you're looking for. So let's slow down a little bit and let's look at what these behaviors are behind perfectionism, these behaviors of spending more time than might be justified, these behaviors of double checking, triple checking, these behaviors of ruminating over conversations where you think you should have said or could have said something differently to get a different outcome. All of these things are really about protecting yourself. It's really about avoiding disappointment or ridicule or humiliation or perhaps even shame. But we don't necessarily process it that way because most of the time we're not aware of when we are in that perfectionist mode. Right? So I'm hoping that this conversation will actually help you in recognizing when are you in perfectionism mode. And by the way, if you're wondering if this inner critic is running your life right now, you can look in the show notes of this episode for my inner critic compass survey, and you can see which of these major inner critics might be running your life right now. Maybe it's the perfectionist, maybe it's a couple, but anyway, if you're interested, check that out. So we're starting to identify, right? What are these behaviors that signify that you might be in perfectionist mode? And when you can stop and say, okay, I see that maybe I'm really stressed out. I'm being really hard on myself. I'm spending a lot of time on things that aren't really big or actually going to move the needle. Maybe I'm spending time on the sand versus the rocks of the deliverable. The reason why you're likely doing this is for self-protection. And so you can walk through maybe why this is something you want to protect yourself from. You can probably point to some reasons in your life that you really want to avoid disappointing others, or you want to be at the quote unquote top of the class. You can probably find experiences in your life where when you fell a little short, maybe you were made to feel bad. Maybe you were humiliated publicly, right? You can probably look at some things in your life and say, oh shit, that's sticking with me about why I can't fail, or why I won't let myself make mistakes, or why I make the stakes really high in every single situation. You can probably do that exploration, and I think it's worthwhile because seeing some of the origin of this can be helpful. But the most important thing for you in terms of undoing the perfectionism, in terms of undoing being hard on yourself, the most important thing is to ask yourself, what's really important to you? What's really important in this situation? What's really going to make the difference? And you can then take a step back and zoom out and look at it from a higher perspective to say, yeah, right. Like me editing this for the 15th time isn't actually that important. What's most important is that I got the executive summary right. I got the conclusions right. I got the next steps right. This is just like a very simple example of what that might look like. But this is how we get out of perfectionism. We start to ask ourselves, who do I want to be in my life, in this situation? And maybe you want to be somebody that makes a huge impact. And maybe you want to be somebody that doesn't self-sabotage getting additional opportunities because you're moving through deliverables and life in a way that is good and good enough versus overdoing. I think that's where a big turning point came for me. When I started to see that the more time I spent on dotting every I and crossing every T, I was losing an opportunity to jump into a new challenge, to be able to add even more value with a new project or opportunity. And you know what? Sometimes that's how we can see folks pass us by in leadership and in life, because they're not worried about, getting every single thing right. They might be okay with getting it 60% right, or maybe even 50% right. But they're willing to do that because they want more. They want to do more. They want to put more out there. They want to have a bigger impact. So you can start to think about, what is it that I want for myself, for my leadership, for my life? And what does that mean in terms of what I need to do differently? And there's a big exercise that I do at the beginning of every year, but I think you can do this with perfectionism type of challenges that you're working on. And that is to ask yourself, what do you want to stop doing? What do you want to start doing? And what do you want to continue doing? And likely you're going to find a long list of things that you can stop doing so that you can take the pressure off of yourself. Years ago, what I realized in terms of how perfectionism was impacting my leadership was when an employee of mine made some comment to me about how I'm really hard on myself. And that really stopped me in my tracks because I thought I hit it really well. And when I had a deeper conversation, I found out that she felt like there were no standards that she could meet, that my standards were so high that she could never feel good about her deliverables. And that cut me to my core because that was never my intention. And I never outwardly said anything around she wasn't doing enough or wasn't doing things good enough, but she was getting that because of how I was treating myself and the choices that I was making as a leader. And so this really made me look at, where am I being so hard on myself? Where am I setting a standard that makes no sense, that's impossible, that actually gets to the point of self-sabotage? Because net, perfectionism is a form of self-sabotage. It's holding you back from bigger, from more, from feeling good, from celebrating yourself, from honoring that maybe you can do less and it can actually be more. You know what I'm saying? So I had to do a lot of work on myself to not be so hard on myself. And I think that's the phrase that I really connect most with perfectionism of am I being so hard on myself? And I think about even this podcast, right? When I launched this podcast back in November of 2023, I did it without being able to do video because I didn't have the resources. I actually edited the first couple of episodes myself because I hadn't found an editor yet, but I didn't want to wait another minute to put my podcast out into the world because my goal was not about putting out the most perfect podcast. It was about doing it. It was about putting something out there that I knew I could grow, get better at, and build on. And I think most of the time, the things in our life are about that. It's about doing the thing. It's about letting good be good enough. It's about being in relationships that aren't perfect, but being willing to put the effort in to continuously get better and better, but not at the sacrifice of your own mental health, not at the sacrifice of beating yourself up and not giving yourself permission to celebrate. I'll give you another example because I want you to think about how this is showing up in your life. So I recently applied to a speaking opportunity, and this application was insane. And a previous version of myself, maybe I would be interested in hiring an expert. Maybe I would give myself 3 or 4 weeks to noodle it and tweak it and work it. Maybe I would even involve AI and have them scan a bunch of things and make sure the language was exactly on point. Maybe that was a previous version of me, but it's not how I approached this application now. What I did is I let myself pour onto the page. I let myself not second guess myself and not overdo it, but allow that raw first version of my thoughts on the answers to be the submission. Now you may be thinking, what? That's crazy. But for me, it was about my intent of letting my thoughts be enough and not getting into overthinking and also not getting into over investing, right? Because if I were to spend let's just say if I were to spend 20 hours on this application versus the 3 that I ended up spending, what is it getting me in those extra hours, those extra 18 hours, 17 hours, whatever, in perfecting answers where I have absolutely no idea how that team is going to make decisions about what speakers they want. I have no idea how nitpicky they're going to be. And I have no idea if the topic itself is resonant, then do all the nitty gritty details actually matter in terms of getting that through? Probably not. And if you've listened to my podcast before, then you know how much I think the energy of how we show up, who we are being when we show up, has more to do with the magic that's possible than us focusing on the doing. And I'll bring this to life in just another quick example. If you are in a bad mood and you send an email to somebody and you think you're hiding that you're in a bad mood or that you're actually in resentment and you're pissed off, like, you're kidding yourself, because that energy will come through. And you know what I mean. I'm sure you've had those examples in your life where you sent an email, it was all niceties, and somebody comes back to you and is like, are you mad at me? Or like, what's happening? You know, that is what I'm talking about in terms of how we can stop perfectionism in their tracks, is to say, like, what is the energy that I want to be in versus what is this doing, this effort, exertion, this forcing energy to make sure that I'm getting everything just right so that nobody can talk smack about what I'm doing. Like, that is not it. And if you're in that energy, then honey, I really hope you sit with this episode a couple of times and listen to it, because you are just hurting yourself. You're not being your own best friend. Like, if you were being your own best friend in those times where you're catching yourself being a perfectionist, you would say, honey, you've done enough. It's good enough. Put it out there. Like, let it go. So I hope that you become your own best friend. And I hope that you start to see where maybe you're doing a little extra, a little too much for the sake of protecting yourself from feelings you don't want to feel, for protecting yourself from hearing things from other people that might scare you or worry you. Like, the only thing that you're doing is you're making way for other people to come in and do more and care less and have less on their heart and their mind while they're doing it. And the last thing that I want to share about perfectionism is that in the world that we are living in, with so much comparison on social media and so much lack of authenticity about what it's actually taking for people to show up in the way that they are, like, of course, we set these unrealistic expectations because we're just kind of thinking, well, if they can do it that way, if they show up that way, if they have this beautiful editing job, if they have their lighting perfect, then I should be able to do it too. And all of that, let me tell you right now, is absolute fucking bullshit. Okay? Like, the fact that we keep comparing to others is what holds us back from doing the thing in the first place, because we think we can never meet that bar. Like, if I sat here and said, I would love to have a podcast as, professional and amazing as Diary of a CEO or any of these top podcasts, a Mel Robbins podcast, whatever, then I would never get started, because we have to start from somewhere, and then we build and we get better, and we can have more support, and we can invest more. And like, what I'm saying about this podcast example is exactly mirrored in everyday life. Like, in my marriage, right? I wasn't the perfect wife day one, and I'm, almost 16 years in. I'm certainly, there is no such thing as a perfect wife, first of all, of course, but I'm still working on how to be a good wife, the kind of wife that I want to be. So just remember that you are consciously and subconsciously being conditioned about what standards make sense. And you have got to question what you're seeing, and you have got to question what you're saying to yourself and what you're thinking about in terms of the work that you do, the relationships that you have, the way you solve problems, all of those things. All right. I'm scratching the surface on perfectionism. And if you are, if you have some questions or you want to learn more, please feel free to reach out to me. All my contact information is in the show notes of wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. I am happy to be a sounding board. I know that this work can change your life because I've done it for myself and it has changed mine. I have started on that path of being my own best friend every day. And I have started to see where I say started to see, and I have absolutely seen where I'm being too hard on myself and I'm making myself feel bad. And I am going down a downward spiral because I have impossible expectations of myself. And I don't want that for you, because you deserve to be proud of everything that you do and everything that you are. You deserve to celebrate every win, even if it wasn't perfect, even if it didn't hit the 100%, even if you know that you could have done something more, something different, or something slightly better. You still get to celebrate it. And that is how we break and crack the code on perfectionism. We celebrate whatever we have done because it is worthy of celebration, no matter the results. You did it, and you're willing to look at it and learn from it and keep moving forward. Done is the antidote to perfectionism. All right. Well, you got an earful here on the Unlock Lab today, and I hope it's deeply embedded and that you start to be your own best friend. All right. Thanks for coming here today, and ciao for now.